In towns once built on coal, oil, steel, and grain, silence now echoes where industry once roared. But the decline didn't come from within, it came from the north. Welcome to the modern trade war, a silent battle fought not with bullets but with tariffs, supply chains, and economic muscle. When the United States decided to flex on its closest trading partner, Canada hit back, hard, and the fallout? It's being felt in places most Americans would never expect. 25% United States tariffs imposed. Canada responds. Today we're diving deep into 10 U.S. states that aren't just frustrated, they're furious. Whether it's Canadian oil undercutting local producers or retaliatory tariffs choking exports, these states are caught in the economic crossfire. And the question isn't just, what is Canada doing to us? It's, are we doing this to ourselves? From the oil fields of the West to the farms of the Midwest, the impact is real. And it's personal. Stick around, because some of the biggest surprises are still to come. Once the backbone of the American frontier, Wyoming built its identity on strength, self-reliance, and black gold. But these days, there's a new kind of pressure in the cowboy state, and it's not from nature. To understand the impact, you need to understand the stakes. Wyoming isn't just a pretty postcard, it's an industrial powerhouse, or at least it used to be. Nearly 60% of the state's economy is rooted in natural resources: oil, coal, natural gas, and minerals. Add in agriculture, especially cattle and wheat, and you get a picture of a state deeply connected to the earth and to global trade. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. Simple in theory, explosive in practice. When the United States slaps tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, or lumber, Canada retaliates. And it's not just headlines. These taxes ripple through local economies, especially places like Wyoming that rely heavily on cross-border trade. Wyoming's energy sector is hurting. Canadian crude is selling at lower prices, making it harder for local producers to compete. The United States tariffs were meant to protect American energy, but Canadian producers just undercut prices globally, creating a surplus. With Canadian oil flowing in cheaper and cleaner, some of it from Alberta's highly efficient sands, Wyoming rigs are going idle.
We ain't just competing with Texas anymore. We're losing contracts to Alberta, and fast.
Tariffs don't just hit exports, they hit imports too. Farmers rely on Canadian fertilizer, machinery parts, and even feed. So when counter-tariffs raise those prices by 10 to 25%, the squeeze gets tighter. And when Wyoming ranchers try to sell beef or grain to Canadian buyers, the tariffs bounce right back. Sales fall, profits shrink, and operations downsize. Let's talk jobs. In small towns across the state, Rock Springs, Gillette, Casper, the trade war is gutting middle-class employment. It's not just the paycheck, it's the pride. Wyomingites are known for independence. But now, many are relying on federal subsidies just to stay afloat.
We don't want handouts, we want fair trade.
In Cheyenne, lawmakers cheer the tariffs. They call it economic justice. But behind closed doors, concern is growing. Because when retaliation hits, it hits states like Wyoming hardest, the very places the tariffs were meant to protect. So, who's really winning this trade war? And more importantly, how long can Wyoming afford to keep fighting? The state is at a crossroads. Keep leaning on old industries and face deeper isolation, or reinvent and diversify. Some towns are investing in wind energy, tourism, and tech. But change is slow. And every day the trade war drags on, more families pack up and leave. Wyoming's story isn't just about Wyoming. It's about how even well-meaning economic strategies can backfire, and how trade wars can hurt the very people they claim to defend. And this is just one state. What about the 9 others where the fallout is even worse? Stick around. Next up, West Virginia, where coal meets collapse. West Virginia. Coal country strikes back. Once the pride of American industry, West Virginia stood tall on coal. Towns boomed, mines dug deep, and paychecks brought power to mountain communities. But in 2025, the story's taken a sharp turn, and Canada's playing a bigger role than most West Virginians ever imagined. In the escalating trade war between the United States and Canada, states like West Virginia have found themselves in the crosshairs, not just politically but economically. This isn't just about tariffs anymore. It's about pride, jobs, and survival. Coal has long been West Virginia's economic lifeline. For decades, it powered homes, heated factories, and drove industry, not just across America, but around the world. Global demand is shifting, cleaner alternatives are rising, but perhaps the most immediate blow? Competition from Canadian energy exports. From hydro to petroleum byproducts, Canada's flooding the United States market with cheaper, cleaner options. And West Virginia's coal just can't compete.
We're getting squeezed from every direction. First the economy, now the Canadians.
And it's not just coal. Natural gas drilling, chemical production, and even timber are caught in the crossfire of tariffs and counter-tariffs. Let's break it down.
We did not start this trade war, but we're certainly not going to fold under pressure. The United States has slapped hefty duties on Canadian aluminum, lumber, and energy products. We fired back, targeting United States exports like coal, chemicals, and machinery.
West Virginia's manufacturers, already struggling with declining demand, are now facing retaliatory duties that make their exports even less attractive to Canadian buyers.
We used to sell pipe fittings to Ontario. Now, it's too expensive for them. We lost that contract.
Small businesses are bleeding, jobs are disappearing, and political leaders in Charleston are demanding action. West Virginia's lawmakers have been vocal in supporting U.S. tariffs, arguing it's about leveling the playing field. But behind closed doors, some admit the backlash is hurting their own people more than Canada. This isn't just economic, it's cultural. Many West Virginians feel forgotten by Washington and undercut by Ottawa, and that's creating a volatile mix of resentment and nationalism. Let's talk real-life consequences. Tariffs have led to plant closures in Charleston and Parkersburg, rising costs for mining equipment, much of it imported, farmers paying more for fertilizers sourced from Canada, and reduced demand for Appalachian hardwoods and chemicals. Residents are feeling it in the grocery aisles and at the gas pumps. That distant-sounding trade war is now just called life.
If we don't export, we don't survive. It's that simple.
So what's next for West Virginia? Some are calling for a rollback of tariffs. Others say it's time to double down on America first, but either way, the damage is already done. Trust across the border has eroded. Canada once viewed West Virginia as a quiet trade partner. Now, it's become a cautionary tale, a state caught between politics and prosperity. If you're finding this eye-opening, hit that like button and subscribe. We're breaking down all 10 U.S. states that despise Canada, and next up is a state where maple syrup isn't so sweet anymore. Talk to folks in West Virginia today and you'll hear two things: pride and pain. Pride in their roots, pain in what's being lost. The Canadian trade fallout didn't start here, but it might just leave one of the deepest scars.
It ain't about left or right. It's about whether we got food on the table. That's it.
Up next, North Dakota, where silos, soybeans, and pipelines are all being pulled into the storm, and the fallout might be even colder than the prairie winters. Don't go anywhere. North Dakota, America's breadbasket. For decades, this state's economy has relied on two massive pillars: agriculture and oil. But in the wake of escalating tariffs and Canada's swift countermeasures, that foundation is starting to crack. It looks peaceful, timeless. But beneath that calm, something is shifting. But when Canadian tariffs hit American agricultural goods, it wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Farmers felt it in their bottom line. North Dakota exports over $4 billion worth of agricultural products annually. A significant portion once went to global markets, including Canada. You plant 1,000 acres and hope to break even. Now, with these tariffs, you're lucky if you don't lose money. It's a squeeze from both sides. And the stress is boiling over. Adding to the sting, many of the fertilizers and farming parts they use come from Canada. So while they're getting fewer profits on exports, they're paying more to grow crops in the first place. Canadian crude and hydroelectricity are flooding south, often at cheaper prices. That's forcing local producers in North Dakota to either cut costs or get pushed out. North Dakota's oil industry transformed small towns overnight, but now, Canada's energy exports are pushing into key U.S. markets, including the Midwest. Tariffs were meant to level the playing field, but in places like Williston, some say it's only made the game harder to play. Trade wars don't just hit ports and factories. They hit playgrounds, clinics, and main streets. The ripple effect of strained trade isn't just economic, it's demographic. Young families are leaving. Schools are consolidating. Hospitals are understaffed. The same tariffs meant to protect jobs might be accelerating their disappearance. Locals still support the idea of being tough on trade, but some wonder, at what cost? For many, it's not about politics, it's about survival. But divisions are growing. And as Canada continues to lean into clean energy and global markets, North Dakota finds itself caught in the crossfire. Even within North Dakota, not everyone agrees. Some push for more protectionism. Others want open markets back. So what happens when your biggest competitor is also your biggest supplier? In North Dakota, it's no longer just a trade issue. It's an identity crisis. And if you think this is complicated, wait until you hear what's brewing in Idaho, where forests, mines, and border politics are colliding in ways few saw coming. Idaho, home to majestic landscapes, resilient people, and an economy rooted in the land. But behind the postcard-perfect scenery, a quiet storm is brewing, and it starts at the border. In Idaho, timber is more than tradition. It's survival. But with Canadian lumber flooding U.S. markets at lower prices, many here feel undercut, outraged, and ready to push back. Idaho's lumber industry employs thousands and fuels small-town economies. For decades, it was a dependable backbone. But when softwood lumber from Canada began arriving in droves, often heavily subsidized by their government, Idaho's mills felt the squeeze. Prices dropped. Contracts disappeared. Jobs vanished.
We can't compete when they're selling it cheaper and faster. Our hands are tied.
Idaho's not just about trees. It's also rich in precious minerals like silver, phosphate, and molybdenum. But the equipment, chemicals, and even explosives needed to operate many Idaho mines? A surprising amount comes from Canada. When tariffs kicked in, the costs soared. A delay at the border or a 25% hike on supplies can shut down operations or stall projects indefinitely. It's not just business, it's lunch money. And Idahoans are tired of playing nice. You know Idaho for its potatoes, but the state also produces massive quantities of wheat, barley, sugar beets, hops, and dairy. And guess who's a key trading partner for these goods? That's right, Canada. When Canada slaps retaliatory tariffs on dairy or wheat, it hits Idaho's farmers straight in the pocket. Margins shrink, supply chains get tangled, and that legendary Idaho resilience, it starts to wear thin. Rural Idaho depends on logging, mining, and farming. If all three struggle, the entire community does. The trade war hasn't just strained business, it's changed daily life. Schools face cuts, clinics go understaffed, and families wonder if they can afford to stay. Frustration turns to blame, and more people are looking north. Not everyone in Idaho is on the same page. While some demand more aggressive action against Canadian trade practices, others fear that isolation could backfire. We need the markets, we need the partnerships, but we also need to protect our own. Where's the balance? In Idaho, the question isn't whether Canada is the enemy, it's whether the fight is worth the fallout. If you think timber towns are angry, wait until you see how Michigan is reacting, where the auto industry, tech exports, and an international bridge are all caught in the middle of a Canadian tug-of-war. In Michigan, cars aren't just transportation, they're a way of life. This state put the world on wheels. But today, the motor is starting to sputter, and the reason might be closer to home than you think, or just across the bridge. Michigan's economy is tied at the hip with Canada's auto sector. Every day, more than $300 million worth of automotive goods cross the border via the Ambassador Bridge alone. But when the U.S. slapped tariffs on imported aluminum and steel, Canada fired back, hitting U.S. auto parts with countermeasures. And for Michigan, that hit wasn't hypothetical, it was brutal. Suddenly, the cost of brake pads, wiring, frames, and even bumpers shot up. Assembly lines stalled, factories trimmed hours, some shut down completely. With tensions high, inspections increased, border wait times doubled, and Michigan businesses that rely on just-in-time delivery, they felt the squeeze hard. It's not just about tariffs, it's the uncertainty. Every delay at the border adds cost. Every new restriction disrupts years of cross-border efficiency. Some days, factories waited hours for parts coming from Windsor. On others, shipments were canceled outright. It's not just autos that are caught in the crossfire. Michigan's dairy farmers have long exported cheese, butter, and milk-based powders to Canada. But Canada's response? A retaliatory tariff that made Michigan dairy uncompetitive almost overnight.
Our biggest customer just stopped buying. They're sourcing from Quebec now.
From apples to beans to beef, Michigan exports a wide range of agricultural goods north. And, many of those are now tangled in the tit-for-tat tariff war. Politicians in Lansing are, stuck in the middle. Some demand tougher action against Canada's supply management system and subsidies. Others warn that retaliation will only hurt Michigan further. And average citizens? They're just trying to hang on. The trade war has made allies into adversaries and neighbors into competitors. My brother works at a parts plant in Windsor.
I work here. We used to laugh about it. Now, we don't talk about trade anymore.
As electric vehicles rise and the auto industry evolves, Michigan has to ask, does it want to go it alone? Cutting ties with Canada could mean short-term pride, but honestly, long-term pain. Over 230,000 Michigan jobs depend on U.S.-Canada trade. Michigan may be stuck in neutral, but next up is a state trying to go full throttle, with no fuel in the tank. Get ready for Ohio, where manufacturing, glass, and steel are on the brink. And Canada might be the last thing keeping some towns alive. Once the beating heart of America's Industrial Revolution, Ohio built its legacy on steel, cars, and blue-collar pride. From Cleveland to Toledo, factory whistles echoed hope. But today, that sound is fading fast. Ohio isn't just any state. It's the industrial core of the Midwest. With over 700,000 manufacturing jobs, it's home to major auto plants, steel mills, and supply hubs. These industries don't work in isolation. They're linked to Canada in ways most people never think about. Canada is Ohio's #1 trading partner, and in 2023 alone, the Buckeye State exported over $20 billion worth of goods north of the border. But that road goes both ways, and that's where things get messy. Let's talk steel first. Ohio's steel industry has been bleeding for years, but tariffs made it worse. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel, Canada hit back, hard, with counter-tariffs targeting U.S.-made steel products and auto parts. Result? Production costs soared. Canadian buyers turned to European and Asian markets. Small steel fabricators in Ohio lost contracts they'd held for decades. These aren't abstract economic moves. These are parents losing jobs, families moving away, towns with shrinking tax bases, and schools on the brink. Ohio is home to several major auto plants, Honda, Ford, and GM among them. Together, they employ tens of thousands of people. But what happens when parts that used to cross the U.S.-Canada border freely now come with higher costs? Cars are not made in one place. They're assembled from components sourced across borders. Wiring harnesses from Ontario, brake components from Ohio, transmissions from Michigan. It's a North American dance. And when that rhythm is disrupted, the whole system stumbles. Ohio isn't just factories. It's also farmland. And guess who used to buy a lot of Ohio soybeans and pork? Yep, Canada. But Canadian buyers started looking elsewhere after counter-tariffs hit U.S. agricultural goods. Prices dropped, margins shrank, and the fallout hit both factory towns and farmlands at the same time. Farmers in Ohio are now dealing with higher input costs, lower prices, and a sense of being stuck in a political fight they didn't ask for. In Columbus, lawmakers talk tough. Stand up to Canada, they say. Protect American jobs. But local businesses quietly say something else. We need the trade. We need the customers. We need the supply chain back. This is the paradox. The louder Ohio pushes for trade war, the more it risks losing what it has left. Is it defiance? Or is it denial? As the fight with Canada drags on, Ohio has to choose. Double down on tariffs or find a new way forward. Trade wars are rarely won cleanly. And for Ohio, the cost of victory may be more than it can afford. The question is no longer whether the fallout is real. It is. The real question now is, who's going to feel it next? Because as tough as it is in Ohio, just wait until we hit Pennsylvania. If you think this was bad, you haven't seen anything yet. In Pennsylvania, steel isn't just an industry, it's a legacy. But what happens when legacy meets reality, and reality hits like a freight train? Canada's trade retaliation has landed hard, and in the Keystone State, the fallout is personal. Once the beating heart of American manufacturing, Pennsylvania's steel industry built cities, wars, and dreams. Places like Pittsburgh, Bethlehem, and Erie once echoed with the clang of industry. But today, those echoes are fainter. After decades of offshoring and automation, Pennsylvania's steel and aluminum sectors were already on shaky ground. Then came the United States tariffs on Canadian metal, and Canada hit back.
We lost 2 major Canadian contracts just like that. That was a quarter of our business.
Canada responded swiftly with tariffs on American steel, aluminum, and other goods. Pennsylvania manufacturers, already operating on thin margins, suddenly found themselves squeezed even tighter. The irony? Many of these companies relied on Canada for both raw materials and as a major export market.
These policies are killing what's left of working-class Pennsylvania.
For towns like Johnstown and Aliquippa, the tariffs didn't just hit companies, they hit people. Thousands of workers either lost jobs or faced reduced hours. Pensions froze, local diners emptied. In Harrisburg and on Capitol Hill, Pennsylvania politicians are walking a tightrope. On one hand, there's national pride and protectionism. On the other, there's economic pain that really crosses party lines. Even pro-tariff voters are starting to ask, is it worth it? While Pennsylvania struggles, Canadian suppliers have begun expanding trade relationships elsewhere, in Asia, in Europe. Meanwhile, some United States manufacturers are moving operations into Canada to avoid tariff headaches altogether. But this is Pennsylvania. Resilience runs deep here. Communities are fighting to adapt, pushing tech apprenticeships, green manufacturing, and local supply chains. Still, the scars of this trade war won't fade easily. But if you think it stops here, just wait until we head down to Texas, where cattle, oil, and cross-border trade collide like nowhere else. Pennsylvania didn't start this trade war, but it's paying the price. Will cooler heads prevail, or is this only the beginning? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification. Up next, Texas versus Canada. Oil, beef, and border battles. Texas, the heart of American independence, a land of cattle, oil, and unapologetic swagger. But even the Lone Star State isn't immune to global politics. Texas is the second largest economy in the United States. It leads the nation in oil and gas production, ranks near the top in agriculture, and exports billions globally, including to Canada. But that strength is exactly why it's so exposed. When the United States slapped tariffs on Canadian aluminum, steel, and softwood lumber, Canada struck back, not just at Washington, but at specific states. Texas, with its oil rigs, cattle ranches, and sprawling ag industry, suddenly became a bullseye. Let's start with oil. Canadian crude has always been a competitor, but now it's a threat. Thanks to the United States-Canada free trade agreements of the past, refineries in Texas built their systems to process heavy Canadian oil. Cheap, abundant, and reliable. But with tariffs disrupting flow and Canadian producers rerouting toward Asia, Texas refineries are left scrambling.
Without Canadian supply, we're paying more for lower-grade crude. That affects gas prices, exports, and jobs across the Gulf. And don't forget the Keystone XL pipeline debacle. Canada remembers.
Now head west and you'll hit another Texas stronghold: agriculture. Texas cattle producers rely heavily on North American trade to move beef. When Canada slapped counter-tariffs on United States beef, Texan ranchers felt it immediately. Prices dropped, exports slowed. Meanwhile, Canadian beef quietly replaced it in Asian and European markets. And then there's cotton, often shipped north for processing or packaging. Add tariffs to the mix, and suddenly Texas cotton doesn't look so profitable. It's like we picked a fight with our customer. Now we're just sitting on the porch waiting for someone to come back. Texas leaders love a good trade fight, at least on camera. Governor statements, local rallies, and a whole lot of America First speeches flood the airwaves. But behind closed doors, worry. Big business in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio is pushing back. The energy sector needs trade. The ag sector needs markets. And tariffs? They're just tightening the noose.
We're not winning, we're just bleeding slowly.
You want to see where the trade war really hurts? Drive through small-town Texas. Communities that rely on exports are seeing freight companies cancel routes. Equipment dealers are losing Canadian suppliers. Even feed prices have jumped because of new cross-border duties. In the Panhandle, one ranching town lost 3 businesses in 6 months. This isn't just politics anymore, it's survival. So here's the big question. Does Texas still want this trade war? Publicly, many say yes. But privately, they're rethinking the strategy. Because every day this continues, more Texans are realizing something uncomfortable. We need Canada more than we thought. Texas may be feeling the heat, but up north in Big Sky country, the storm is just beginning. When Canadian tariffs hit cattle, wheat, and timber, Montana didn't just lose money, it lost its grip on economic stability. Stick around, because what's happening out there might be the most quietly devastating chapter of this entire trade war. Montana, a land of big skies, hard work, and quiet strength. Cattle graze in the distance, wheat fields ripple in the wind, and logging trucks rumble down 2-lane highways. But beneath this peaceful scenery, there's trouble brewing, not from the weather, not from Washington, but from the north. Canada has fired back in the trade war, and in Montana, that's a direct hit. From cattle to timber to wheat, Canadian counter-tariffs are squeezing the industries that built this state. Let's start with cattle. Montana's beef industry is iconic. With over 2.5 million cows, it's one of the state's top exports. But guess what? Canadian ranchers are now offering lower prices to international markets, thanks to favorable trade deals with other countries. And they're not buying from Montana like they used to.
We used to sell a good portion up north, now it's like hitting a brick wall.
With Canadian tariffs in place and buyers turning elsewhere, Montana beef is getting boxed out, and ranchers are the ones paying the price. Montana's forests have always been an economic backbone, but Canada, already a powerhouse in softwood lumber, is now exporting more wood, at lower prices. The United States hit Canadian lumber with duties years ago, and Canada retaliated, hard. Now Montana loggers are seeing contracts dry up, some mills have cut hours, others have shut down entirely. Timber towns once thriving on cross-border demand are fading fast. Montana is one of the nation's top wheat producers, especially durum and spring wheat. But now, Canadian wheat is undercutting American prices in global markets. Why? Because Canadian producers are filling the void left by United States tariffs on other countries, creating a domino effect. Montana's farmers, who rely heavily on exports, are stuck in the middle of a trade war they didn't ask for.
My margins are razor thin. One more bad season and I'm out.
And while Washington argues the crop keeps growing unsold.
Canada's killing our cows, our crops, and our trees? I thought they were supposed to be nice. Sad.
The 47th president may have underestimated just how not nice Canada can be in a trade war. The numbers tell one story, but, the people tell another. School enrollments are down, stores are closing, small towns are fading. Empty storefronts line the streets, and school buses travel quieter roads in rural areas. When industries suffer, people leave, and Montana's rural heart is bleeding. There's pride in doing things the Montana way, but honestly, pride doesn't pay the bills. As Canadian exports surge and U.S. industries flounder, Montana is stuck with the worst of both worlds: limited buyers, high competition, and, a shrinking economy. Montana politicians are calling for aggressive trade action. More tariffs, more protection. But will it work? Experts warn that escalating the trade war may just make things worse. After all, Montana's industries are deeply tied to global markets, and that includes Canada.
This isn't just about economics, it's about survival.
And if you think Montana has it bad, wait until you see what's happening in Wisconsin. From dairy to paper, they're losing ground fast, and fighting back even harder. Don't go anywhere, the next chapter is a shocker. Wisconsin, America's dairy heartland. The land of cheese curds, milk mustaches, and Packers' pride. But lately, the only thing curdling faster than cream is the mood of local farmers. Once known as America's dairyland, Wisconsin has built an entire economy and culture around milk, cheese, and agriculture. But now, that identity is under siege. When the U.S. slapped tariffs on Canadian aluminum, steel, and dairy, Canada didn't just take it on the chin, they hit back. And guess who was in the crosshairs? You got it, Wisconsin. Wisconsin produces more than 30 billion pounds of milk annually. But when Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. dairy, demand for Wisconsin exports took a direct hit.
Suddenly, shipping cheese to Canadian shelves wasn't just unprofitable, it was nearly impossible. We had contracts. We had customers in Ontario. Overnight, they disappeared. Now we're dumping milk we can't sell.
Tariffs weren't just a policy move, they were a punch to the gut. Canadian buyers turned to domestic dairy and even European alternatives, leaving Wisconsin producers high and dry. And it's not just the milk that soured. Wisconsin's paper industry, once one of the largest in the United States, relies on Canadian pulp imports and cross-border sales. Those retaliatory tariffs? They made raw material costs spike and exports drop. Companies began tightening belts and handing out pink slips. Even digital age aside, the paper industry still supports tens of thousands of jobs across the state. Tariffs turned that quiet strength into a slow bleed. Let's not forget Wisconsin's cranberries, soybeans, and corn, all of which were part of Canada's hit list. The ripple effects reached every corner of rural life. You know, they say this trade war is about pride, but what good is pride when your farm's underwater? From farm subsidies barely covering losses to co-ops shutting down, the landscape has changed. And despite public support for standing tough against Canada, behind closed doors, many farmers are asking the real question: at what cost? Tariffs have become a political litmus test in Wisconsin. Some cheer the tough stance, while others are demanding relief, or even reversal. Politicians walk a tightrope, caught between national pride and economic survival. And Donald Trump? He's still a favorite here. But, you know, even his supporters are starting to sweat.
They're taxing our cheese? I love cheese. That's criminal. Very criminal.
10 states, 10 very different struggles, but, you know, one thing connects them all: a fragile, overlooked relationship with their northern neighbor. The tariffs were meant to protect. Instead, they've exposed just how intertwined the U.S. and Canadian economies really are. What started as a political flex turned into a local crisis for many. And the irony? The very places cheering the loudest for trade retaliation are often the ones with the most to lose. In this war of tariffs, there are no victors, only lessons. And one of the biggest? In a world this connected, hurting your neighbor might just mean hurting yourself. What do you think? Should the United States double down on tariffs or find a new path forward with Canada? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. This story is far from over.